Hi, Fleurette here with 𝐒𝐿𝐭3. Thank you so much for joining me. You can see we're a little festive here today for the Play at Ho Home. We're going to make 3 easy, quick cards that are going to look amazing. Your friends will think you spent a lot of time on them, but they're really quick and simple. We're going to be playing with some embossing and of course some stamps, ink, all kinds of fun stuff. So let's get started and get your ink on.
So here's a quick peek of the 3 cards we're going to be making. Super easy, super quick, take about 10 minutes a piece. And here's some of the supplies. We have the Juicy embossing ink, and we're also going to be focusing on the Gold Rush embossing powder and my favorite stamp set, Little Birdie. What I love about this stamp set is it's a scene builder, but you can use the elements alone. It has great sentiments like sending warm winter wishes, sending thoughts and prayers, and a few others, birthday wishes. You also have mom, daughter, sister, grandmother, and friends, so you can have happy birthday to them as well. So our Juicy watermark embossing ink is amazing because it's very juicy like the name, so it works great. It stays wet for a long time, but look at that pad. It's very firm and very strong, so it will last you a long time, but it's great for all the detailed images and for sentiments, and you're going to see that a little bit more later, and I'll give you some more detail on that as well. So here's a quick look at our embossing powders, and I'll be going a little bit more into detail as we make the cards, but they're ultra fine, so they don't have any grit to them. They melt really smooth. There's no fillers, so they also melt really fast, and they're great for detailed images and those little tiny sentiments as well. Now it's time for the fun of card making. So I have my trusty Misty stamping positioning tool, a red piece of cardstock that's A2 sized, trimmed a little smaller because I usually like to have a border around it, and I've used an anti-static tool because when you're embossing, you want to use that before you put your ink on so that you don't have a lot of stray pieces of embossing powder that might stick to your paper where you don't want it. I've already gone ahead and put a couple of stamps on my Misty, but you're going to see me put some other ones on in a little bit, and I've inked up the stamp with the Juicy embossing ink, and you can see here on a piece of colored cardstock you can easily see where the ink is. So I'm going to pour some of the Gold Rush embossing powder on there and then tap that off. If you've never embossed before, an embossing ink is a very sticky, wet, clear ink, and the stickier it is, the wetter it is, the better it will work for you. And then you take an embossing powder and you're going to sprinkle it on top, and it's going to stick to it like a glue. And then you take a heat gun, and when you heat it up, those tiny particles will melt together and create this raised glossy finish. And you're going to see an example of that right now. I'm going to take my heat gun, which it's always a good idea to heat your heat gun up really hot before you start, and then I'm going to take it to the paper, and you can see magically it's turning to this beautiful gold color, and that's how you also know that you've embossed properly. If you see any dull finish, that means it's not been heated up all the way, and you can see here as I go over I get this beautiful gold, and when I set that down on my Misty you're going to really see that color pop. I mean, look at that gold. It's so shiny, so smooth, and so beautiful. And that's the other thing. There are a lot of embossing powders on the market, but the difference with ours is it has no fillers in it, and it's grind to such a fine state that it works better when you have these detailed images. It's going to be easier for you. You're going to have better results. So now I'm going to move the stamps from the Misty where I had them, and I'm going to start placing them on other parts of the card. And you can see I also grabbed the cute little birdie, and I'm arranging a scene here using the stamps. And what's really cool is I can put a bunch on now, and then I'm going to ink those up. Let me close my Misty here, and they're going to stick to my lid, and then I'm going to be ready to ink them. So now I have my stamps all ready, but the thing you always have to remember is to take your anti-static tool and rub it on the card, because if you don't, you will have a lot of stray pieces. So now I'm just going to put ink on all of those pieces and then close my lid, but I'm not going to smash this down. I'm just barely kissing it to the paper. If you push down too hard, you're going to smush the rubber or spread the rubber out, and your lines are not going to be as smooth. So that's kind of like a little tip whenever you're stamping with a stamping positioner, whether it's regular ink or embossing ink, just kiss it to the paper, let the paper absorb the ink, You don't need to push hard, just kind of kiss it down, rub it a little bit so that you get a nice impression. Earlier I talked about having a really juicy, wet embossing ink, and that's what makes juicy ink different, because it is very juicy, it stays wet for a long time. So you can see I can build almost my entire scene without having to emboss in between. So right now I'm kind of thinking, where do I want to place these little berries? I'm just kind of arranging the little scene, and then I move it over. But I have a lot of working time here, and that's why juicy embossing ink, once you try it, it's going to be your go-to ink. It's also, like I said, great for detailed images, because this image has a lot of fine lines and details, and they're just coming out beautifully. Now I'm going to put a couple little berries on the very end here. And even without the gold, you can see how cute that is. That's the other thing with our juicy embossing and watermark ink. You notice there's a watermark on the end of the name, and that's because if I wanted to, I could actually leave it like that and have the watermark of the image instead of putting embossing powder on it. So you can do all kinds of fun techniques, and I'll probably do another video where we do some watermark stuff with it. But right now we're concentrating on the embossing powders and the inks, just to play around and get some really fun quick cards. And these are great if you want to make multiple cards too, because once you have your design set, you're going to be able to multiply these or just remake them over and over again. Now you can see, because the ink is so juicy and so wet, I had so much working time. Look at all those beautiful images I was able to put on at once, and I didn't have to keep putting powder on and keep heating it. I was able to stamp them all and even like think about where I wanted to put things, and then finally heat emboss it. Now look, it's just so magical. Once you start embossing, you're going to be addicted to it, because there's just something about watching that embossing powder melt into that beautiful raised gold. Look at that. Oh, so pretty. Now, if you miss a little section, you can see by the berries there, I did not connect that little stamp to the branch. You can grab the ink refill of the juicy embossing ink. So refills are great for adding more ink to your pad, but they're also great for this. I just take a little drop, put it on my mat, took a paintbrush, and dabbed a little bit of that juicy embossing ink from my re-inker, and then I'm going to put the powder on, and now it's going to connect. So the re-inkers are not just for re-inking. You can do all kinds of fun effects just using the re-inker alone without the stamp pad. Oh my gosh, I'm just looking at this card in the light now with the gold, and it's just so pretty. I think the gold rush with the red is just so stunning. So I'm going to heat that little stem up there that I added, and then I'm going to put a sentiment. So this is essentially a one-layer card, so it's really simple in that regard. So I'm going to look at my stamp set and try to decide what sentiment I'm going to put on there. And a nice way is you can just use the stamp sticker sheet, which is what you're looking at here. The sticker sheet is basically what the stamps stick onto, and I can line that up over my design with the sentiment to decide which one I want to put in there. So that's just a little tip, something I like to do when I'm designing a card. So I'm going to put my card back into my MISTI and grab a couple of magnets to keep it in place, and we're going to adhere our sentiment stamp onto the stamping positioner. Of course, once I put my magnets down, I'm going to grab my stamp, and I like to do this before I put the anti-static powder on, because otherwise you're going to get some powder on your stamp. So I'm just lining it up to see where I want it, what section, and then try to get it straight. And I realize, oh, it's not exactly where I want it, so I position it again, and I'm like, okay, I think that's it, and we're gonna close the lid once we get it all straightened out. If you want to use a ruler or something, you can do that too. I usually just like to eyeball it. So now I've got the sending on there. I could put the other sentiment below it if I wanted to right now, but sometimes when I'm doing my sentiments, I like to take just a little bit more time and line them up. So for this, I'm going to ink up one at a time. So I'm inking up the sending stamp, and it's a more solid stamp, so sometimes you may have to do it 2 times, but again, remember, just push that down. But I look at it and I'm like, oh, I don't need to ink it again. It inked perfectly, even though that's a really solid stamp the letters are very solid, and a lot of times you'll have to do it twice, but because the ink is so juicy, I was able to do it one time. And now I'm going to dust off the powder and put it back into my container. Always put your powder back into your container. I can't tell you how many times I have knocked one off my desk and had powder everywhere. So take the time and put it in your little container before you move on. Now look at that. So now I have sending, and I'm going to grab the next sentiment to put underneath. So I'm going to pop that in here, but we will clean that later, and I'm going to show you how we do that. So I'm going to grab the little sentiment below, and it's sending warm winter wishes. And you can see I'm using the sticker sheet again to decide where I want to put it. I put it right under sending, and I'm going to close my lid, and we're going to put our anti-static on there. It probably already has enough, but I like to, just to be safe, because these are teeny tiny letters. And when I take my pad, I just barely tap it out. You don't need to smush it on or anything like that. I'm just tapping. And then I'm going to close the lid and just kiss it gently to the paper. Let the ink do most of the work, and I'm just running my finger across, giving just a little bit of pressure to make sure I get all the letters in. And this is where you're also going to see, look at the detail. I mean, those are such tiny letters, but you can totally read that sentiment. And you're also going to see now, when we put the embossing powder, how good this embossing powder works and this ink works for detailed images, because that is a teeny tiny sentiment. And so many times when you have that, you're not going to be able to read it. But with the juicy embossing ink and the 𝐒𝐿ECON 3 embossing powders, you're going to be able to read those teeny tiny little letters. So I'm heating my heat gun up so that it's nice and hot, and then I'm going to run it over that sentiment, and look at that. And I'm going to bring it up to the camera so that you can see and read that sentiment. It's just amazing. I mean, look at warm winter wishes. You can see each and every letter, and the gold is just so shiny and beautiful. So I'm just going to grab some foam tape, and I put some on the back. It's essentially a one-layer card, but I usually do like to pop it up, and I usually to have a card front and then a card base, even so it's kind of like a one-layer card, but not technically one. So I'm just going to pop that on, and look at that white border, just adds that bit of elegance to it, and I just think that's so beautiful. And I'm going to move it so you can see the shine, and it's raised, and later I'll have a close-up picture so you can see the raised edges of it. It's kind of hard to see on camera, but so beautiful, so easy, and people will think you spent so much time making this simple card. So now we're going to move on to our second card, and we're going to use the Flora stencil from 𝐒𝐿ECON 3. It's a really pretty stencil, works great for ink blending and all kinds of other things. You can make all kinds of fun backgrounds with it, or you can use it as a simple element on a card. Now we're going to grab our juicy embossing ink, and I am going to literally just dab it over the whole entire area. And that's what's important about having the pad that we have on our embossing ink. It's very strong, so you can do things like this without damaging the pad. So I'm going to keep dabbing it until I see that all the areas are wet, that I've hit all of those areas. And I just have a piece of green cardstock in there, and I'm just dabbing it and moving it around and taking a look. And this is going to be a really pretty organic look. It's going to have, I didn't put anti-static on this one because I really wasn't too worried about little pieces getting here and there. It'll kind of add to the card, but I can always use a paintbrush like before and remove little specks, and I'm sure I'll be doing that too. So I'm going to grab the embossing powder, and this is the gold brush again, and I'm sprinkling it all over. And you can see it looks like a lot of embossing powder is being used, but when you pour that back in, you'll see that there is so much in there. You'll be able to use this over and over and over again. It will last you a really long time. And what I'm using is just a piece of paper that I've folded in half. It makes it really easy. I just put that under my cardstock, pour my embossing powder, and then I fold it back in half, and it works like a little siphon and puts it back into my jar. So here I decide I'm going to remove a couple of those little straggler pieces of embossing powder with my paintbrush. And I also got a couple of little wet spots on my card, but those will dry and go away because I had, I think, some water on my fingers there. So don't worry about that. Plus, we'll cover it up with a sentiment. So here's where you're going to see how smooth and beautiful this embossing powder is, because this is a really solid piece. Look at how beautiful that's melting, and it's magical, isn't it? It's just so pretty to watch melt. It's so addicting. Once you start, you're going to want to make so many embossed cards, and you're going to try to think of all the different ways you could use it. So we're making this card on the fly. I don't really know exactly what I'm going to do with it. So I'm going to grab, I know I want to put a sentiment on it, so I'm going to grab this really cute stamp set, Merry and Bright, and I'm going to look at it and decide what sentiment I'm going to put on there. I just cut a piece of white cardstock and made it into a strip to put across the card front, and we're going to put the sentiment on that. And there I was just kind of using that sticker sheet method I showed you before, so I can lay it on and see what it might look like as a sentiment on the strip. It also lets you measure which ones will fit. So I finally decide which one I'm going to use. I was going to use Merry Christmas, but then I decide I'm going to do Happy Holidays across the front, and I grab my mini Misty for this one, and I'm just going to use it for the sentiment piece, and I'm going to put that strip into the Misty. I adhered it with a magnet, and now I'm going to take out the holidays, and I'm going to lay that on there, and this time I'm going to put both sentiments on at the same time right next to each other. And I'm going to take the happy, which is tiny, and then the holidays, which is larger, and just kind of line them up. I like to eyeball things. If you're not comfortable just eyeballing it, you can use like a little ruler and get everything nice and straight. But I think most of the time when I'm making a card, I don't worry about it too much. It's supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to be stressful. So just enjoy it and do the best you can. And as you do more and more, you'll get better and better at creating these or lining them up. And sometimes I fiddle with it a little longer than I even need to, like I did there. So I'm just going to close the lid and kiss it down, straighten out my strip. And once I have this first card done, I can multiply these. I can make them over and over again because I'll have everything set up. So I used my anti-static tool again, and I put that on the strip. I'm going to grab my Juicy Watermark Embossing ink, and I'm just going to remember, tap, tap, tap gently. I'm not pushing down very hard. It's just kind of a nice little tapping motion. And then I'm going to close my lid and gently kiss it to the paper and run my finger across. Now, because this is white paper, I'm not going to be able to see it as easily, and you definitely won't see it on camera, but if you angle it a little bit in your room, in the light, you'll be able to see the glossiness. And I realized, like, I think I missed like part of the sentiment, so I wanted to make sure I got the whole thing, and I inked it up one more time. And that's what's amazing about the Misty is you can double stamp, triple stamp, and it's always going to be in the same place, so you don't have to worry about that. So I'm going to put my embossing powder on and tap it off. And then if you notice there's a section you missed, you can just add a little more and tap it off, and look at that. Look at the tiny sentiment. Again, it always amazes me at how well the Juicy Embossing ink and the ink-on 3 embossing powders do with a very detailed tiny sentiment. So now I'm going to grab my heat gun, make sure it's nice and hot, and I'm going to run it over the sentiment, and I get to watch the magic happen, and so do you, with where it turns to that gold. And remember, that's how you can always tell that you have melted it properly, is it's nice and shiny. If you notice any dullness to it, that just means that you need to heat it a little bit more and melt it all the way. So now I'm going to take the sentiment strip and decide where exactly I want to put it. I wasn't sure if I was going to have it go all the way across, and then I decided I was going to make a little flag at the end. So I'm going to cut the end a little bit shorter, and here's how you make a nice little flag. You're just going to take your scissors, find the center, and cut a little snip in it, and then you're going to go from one corner to that center snip, and then the other corner to the center, and then you're going to get that nice little flag on the end. Isn't that so cute? And it's so simple and so easy to do. And then I'm going to line it up, and I'm going to use some foam tape to pop this up a little bit from the card. And I'm fiddling with this a lot because I'm really designing it as we go along. I really didn't have a plan here. So here's where I grab some foam tape. I'm going to turn that over. I'm going to grab the foam tape, snip off a piece, and adhere it to this sentiment strip. I really wanted to keep this card simple because I thought it'd be great to have a card that you could easily recreate over and over again so that you can make multiple cards to send to all of your friends. But it seems like it's taking a long time, but once you do this one card, these will be super quick and super easy. And I noticed I didn't do as long of a piece that I needed. You can always cut off another little chunk of foam tape and then you're ready to go. So I'm just going to peel off the little backing and stick it onto my card front. What's great about the cards we're making today is they literally take about 10 minutes a piece. And actually this one, I think if we were to recreate it, we could probably put this one together in less than 10 minutes because it's nice and simple. So I pop that on. I'm just going to cut the strip alongside the card front so that it's the same size. And then I'm going to grab my card base, which is also white. You know, I like to have that nice light white edge. And this is an A2 size card. So I cut the card front a little smaller than a normal A2 size card so I'd have that nice little border. Here I'm using some liquid glue instead of tape to put it on because I already have the one piece popping up with foam, so I thought the card base part I would stick down with some liquid glue. One thing I like about liquid glue is it gives you a little working time, a little wiggle room. Like you can see here, I didn't exactly center it properly, but I can move it around a little bit with the liquid glue until I get it nice and centered. So I'm just going to run my hands along it for a little bit and make sure I get it nice and smooth and adhered to the paper. Now we can stop here, but I decided I wanted to add a little bling. So I grabbed some elements to put on here, or some embellishments. I really like these Trinity stamp embellishments. They have this nice little container, and you can check out their website too. But I'm just going to grab a few of these and lay them all around, scatter them around. I usually like to do odd numbers. I think it looks better in design, kind of like ink-on-3. Always good to have a little odd number. And I'm just going to glue these embellishments down using the same liquid glue, and this is just a liquid paper glue, but it also works good for embellishments. Just make sure when you choose a glue that it's a glue that's going to dry clear, so that you don't have anything showing if the glue goes around the edges of, say, your little elements. So I'm just going to keep putting these little embellishments on one at a time, and I usually just like to do a little drop and then put one element on or embellishment and go one at a time. But the other thing I was thinking, this card would have been also really pretty if we would have taken the stencil and put the same flower on the opposite side. So there's so many things you can do with stencils and the Juicy embossing ink along with the embossing powder. And then that's about all I'm going to do to this card, and I'm going to hold it up for you in a minute here and kind of show you how really pretty and shiny this embossing powder is. Now look at that. Oh my gosh. You see that shine? And in person, it's so much prettier. I really wish Camera could pick that up, but it usually doesn't. So now I'm going to show you how we clean our stamps. It's fun, it's easy. You're going to be surprised, and you're going to start cleaning your stamps, because I know it's something that I used to put off or didn't enjoy doing until I came out with the ink-on-3 Ink Off Stamp Cleaner. It's the only one of its kind, and our cleaner is actually in a pad, almost like an ink pad. So once we all get to start traveling again, this is a great cleaner to bring with you when you travel, because it's not considered a liquid. So I am just taking it and I'm dabbing it on, and you'll notice I flipped some of them over, because when you're embossing, sometimes you'll get the anti-static powder on the back of your stamps or the embossing powder on the back of your stamps, and the stamps won't stick. So you can make your stamps nice and sticky again just by flipping them over, dabbing a little bit of our ink cleaner on there, and then I'm using the Ink Off cloth to wipe off the excess cleaner and the ink that's on there. And when these are done, these are going to look brand new again. Now our ink off cloth is also amazing. It's one of the highest quality microfibers cloths you can get. You can just throw it in the wash. I use it for watercoloring all the time too, and look at how easy and fun it is to clean your stamps. But yeah, you can throw the 𝐒𝐿3 cloth into your washing machine. Just don't use any fabric softener, and then you can throw it into your dryer and it'll get nice and fluffy. So I'm just rubbing these off, and then look at how clean they are and how easy that was, because usually cleaning your stamps is no fun and it's a lot of work. The other thing is this ink off cleaner even works with permanent inks, so you can get your stamps nice and clean again. The only thing is, as most of you know, a really good quality stamp will stain with some ink. So if it's a stain, it won't come out, but if it's just ink or permanent ink on there, it's going to come right off. And look, those are the stamps we just cleaned. They look brand new again. Isn't that awesome? So check out our ink cleaner, because I know you will absolutely love it. So now we're on to our third and last card, and I love this card because we literally only use the large flower from the stamp set. And you'll notice I just keep inking it up, and then I stamp it down, and then I peel it off and I move it to the next section, and I'm going to make this beautiful flower border all the way around my card base. So it's one stamp, super simple, super fast, and because the ink is so juicy and so wet, I can do the whole thing all at once. So you can see I've stamped all the images without having to stop and worry about my embossing ink drying and the powder not sticking. I can go all the way around, put my embossing powder on it, and it's all going to stick. And then we're going to move on to heating it up. So here you can see I'm going to grab my embossing powder and sprinkle it all over. And here's where I say I'm using this same embossing powder for all of these cards. And you can see when I pour it back in the jar, it almost looks like the jar is still full. So this embossing powder is going to last you a really, really long time. Now it's time to do the magical heat up. So my heat gun is nice and hot, and I'm just going to go around and look at how beautiful this is. I really do love this red with the gold, but I was thinking this would be really pretty with a really dark blue as well, or even a black. So you can do so many things and create so many cards. And you can see this card is probably the easiest card of all three of the cards that we've made, but it's going to look very elegant. It's going to look like you spent a lot of time on it, but it really is simple. You can see we've gone all the way around, and you can see also when the embossing powder is completely melted, it's just a beautiful bright gold. I forgot to mention, when I had my cardstock in my MISTI, you're probably wondering how it was stuck down. I did not use the magnets for this one because I knew I was going all the way around the edges. I actually just took a piece of tape, double-sided stick tape, and put it on the back of the card front and stuck it into the MISTI that way. Or you could move your magnet from place to place. Just make sure you don't move the cardstock so that you don't have to worry about where you're stamping. So just stick it, you can stick it right into your MISTI with a little piece of double stick tape. So now I just cut a circle using a die cut, and I'm going to grab another one of the sentiments from the Merry and Bright stamp set, and this one is Merry Christmas. And I stamped it one time, it was good to go. Put a little foam tape on the back of my die cut, and I'm just going to pop that right in the middle of the card. So you can see this is a really simple card, but very, very elegant. I cut the card front a little smaller than an A2 size card, and I'm going to use some double stick adhesive and pop it onto another white card base, and voila, look how beautiful that is. Isn't that so pretty? So now we've made 3 cards in under 10 minutes a piece. So in a second I'm going to show you that close-up of the embossing powder. Isn't that beautiful?
Well, thanks for joining me here today at 𝐒𝐿𝐿3 at the Play at Ho-Ho Home. I had such a great time creating these 3 easy, fun cards with you. I hope it inspires you to give it a try. And be sure to check out our social media. We have a YouTube channel, we have Instagram, Facebook, you name it, you can find us. We have all kinds of great inspiration all the time. Different prizes, you name it. And be sure to check out the coupon for the Ho Ho Home event today, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.